Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. My name is Tsion, in desperate need of a haircut, Martins, and this is another edition of BTG Tips. So the area I'm going to be tackling today is monologues, specifically designing a monologue. There is so much that goes into the world of monologues, and they're extremely important to drama. I'm going to be covering a little bit of that. So, what is a monologue? A monologue is a solo speech delivered by one character in a play to other characters or directly to the audience, which in this case are always silent. This is always done solo. Monologue. Monologue. You get the point. When a character is delivering their solo speech, a lot of the times it can be them talking to themselves. That is known as an interior or internal monologue, or a soliloquy. A good example of a soliloquy is William Shakespeare, Hamlet, to be or not to be.
To be or not to be. That is the question. Sorry.
So another thing to remember when we're talking about creating a monologue, we're not talking about performing it, because that's a whole other video. What we are talking about right now is simply putting the words or putting the structure together. But you need to remember, there's a small % of communication that is actually verbal. Most of communication is non-verbal. And that is backed up in a study that I could go into, but I don't have the time. Without further ado, tip number 1, know your character, know their voice. It's always good to have a character profile handy, so you understand just in a nutshell your character's motivations, their drivers, their background, what leads them to get to the point of the monologue. So when you're about to write a monologue, or if you're creating a monologue as a script writer, you're going to have your script handy, but definitely make sure you have a character profile of the character you're writing the monologue for, so that you're able to give the audience a really good understanding of who your character is. So know the voice in terms of how you're going to be delivering the monologue. Is it entertaining? Is it hard-hitting? Is it timid? What kind of voice does your character have, and how can you now translate that into the monologue? So that needs to be consistent through, so that the audience leaves your monologue with a much better understanding of who your character is. Tip number 2, what kind of impact do you want your monologue to have on your audience? Of course, like I said, the monologue is always, when you're acting, everything's always being delivered to the audience. So you want to think about, what kind of emotions am I trying to invoke for them? So think of a range. Do you want your audience to feel repulsed by your character by the time they're done talking? Or do you want them to now to maybe feel some sympathy, some empathy for your character? Do you want them to feel angry, like to do enraged at your character? What is he or she doing? What's going on? What kind of emotions do you want to get out of your audience? And make sure that when you're writing your monologue, you're doing that intentionally. Specifically?
This is a video of Tommy trying to say specifically. Go, Tommy.
You say it first.
Specifically.
Specifically, when you're coming to the end of your monologue. Tip number 3, know your story. So know the impact of the monologue, not just on the audience, but on the story as a whole. So make sure you have a very good understanding of your story. If you're writing monologues, a lot of the time when I do script writing, I will write the story before I start to slide in the monologues or put in the details. So I have an idea of how my story is going to end. When we're doing script writing as a team, that's how we do things. So the monologue will come after the story is created, or the monologues. So make sure you know, what is my monologue doing for my story as a whole? How does this add to my story? How does it change it? What does it do for the journey, for the continuation, not just for my character? The journey. You see what I was doing there? The journey. What does it do, not just for my character, but what does it do for my story as a whole? This monologue, a lot of the time, people can waste monologues just for the sake of talking to the audience. That's not what we're trying to do. We're thinking, how is this monologue moving the story along? Tip number 4, structure. This is probably the most important tip in terms of writing a monologue. What is your structure? a very good way of writing monologues: first line and last line. You write the first and you write the last. This helps you understand how you're coming into the monologue. Potentially, a lot of the time, a monologue comes off of the back of what somebody else has said. So the first line allows you to know your context, know where you're writing from, why you're writing, what the monologue is in response to. That structure. Then the last line, how you want to leave your audience, which obviously goes back to point 2. So start with the first line and write the last line, and then start to fill in everything in between. When you're filling in the in-between, think about the journey you're taking your character on. How the kind of emotions that your character is coming with, how do those emotions lead them through the monologue to the last line? A good thing to think about as well in terms of structure, try to keep your monologue concise. However, if you can't, and you do have a bit of a longer monologue, think about, how can I keep this entertaining? Try and break it up a little bit. Again, this will come a lot down to performance and to movement. But even in your script writing, think about how you can break it up just to keep it entertaining so that the audience is engaged the entire way. Think pizzazz. Anyway, that's it from me for Bridge the Gap tips. This has been creating and designing a monologue. I hope it helped. All the best. Stay safe. Stay in your house.